The door cracked open a few inches. Jeannie peeked out. Relief etched across her features. "Thank you," she said quietly, ushering her son into another room so he wouldn't overhear. I've never been so scared. They said if we don't sign papers tomorrow, they'll hurt my family." Ryan walked up to her porch, removing his cap. "They won't come back tonight," he assured her. "But be ready to leave if we say so. We'll get you somewhere safe if it comes to that." Caleb nodded in agreement. "We'll keep an eye out. They didn't get what they wanted, so they'll escalate." Jeannie's voice shook with a mixture of gratitude and dread. "I'll do whatever you say. Just don't let them hurt my children." Ryan gently squeezed her shoulder. "We won't. I promise." Midnight found Ryan awake in his living room, phone in hand, waiting for calls from neighbors who might face similar threats. He stared at the pictures lining the mantel, images of him in uniform with his old Delta Force unit, their faces marked by hard-earned camaraderie. Another showed him hiking in the Sawtooth Mountains with friends from town. He wondered if he could reach out to any of his old teammates for backup. That was complicated territory, he hadn't asked for help from them in years. And many had moved on to private security jobs far away. He scrolled through his phone contacts until he found the name, Marcus "Hawk" Hawthorne. They'd survived some of the worst hotspots in the world together, from desert cities to jungle hideouts. If there was anyone Ryan could trust to watch his six, it would be Hawk. After a long pause, he pressed call. The phone rang. Once. Twice, then a sleepy voice answered. "Ryan?" Hawk sounded surprised. "It's been a minute." Ryan allowed himself a wry chuckle. "More like 5 years." "Yeah. Well, time flies." Hawk replied, voice perking up. "You okay?" Ryan inhaled slowly. "I've got a problem out here in Idaho. I might need your skill set again. If you're available." A beat of silence. "Cartel?" Hawk asked in a low tone, reading between the lines. He knew no one called him for a minor scuffle. Ryan confirmed with a monosyllable. "They're strong, organized, and pushing people around. I can't let that happen here." Hawk sighed. "I'm in the middle of a contract in Seattle, but it's wrapping up in a few days. I can detour your way if you can hold out." Relief threaded through Ryan's tension. "We'll manage until then." "Roger that," Hawk said, reverting to old habits. "Send me the details." Ryan ended the call, exhaling. The next step was in motion. Now he just had to keep the town safe until Hawk arrived. But the sense of approaching violence loomed larger each day. The cartel was brazen, and that meant their next move could be catastrophic for anyone who stood in their way. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees around the farmhouse. Ryan rose and walked to the front window, gazing out at the moonlit fields, the silhouette of his barn, the fence line, and the distant hills stood etched against the night sky. This was his home, his sanctuary. And if the cartel insisted on bringing their war to Copper Ridge, they would learn very quickly that Ryan Halverson was far from just a simple farmer. 2 days later, the sky was a bleached shade of pale blue, the summer heat rolling in waves across the farmland. Jeannie Cook had spent a restless night, half expecting the black SUV to roar back down her driveway at any moment. Her phone calls to the sheriff's office had yielded nothing but a promise to look into it. No one had shown up. Meanwhile, her cattle needed tending, and her teenage daughter was due home from a school trip in less than a week. Ryan Halverson, however, had not abandoned her. He had installed a hidden trail camera near the entrance to her property, along with a low-profile sensor that would send an alert to his phone if a car crossed her driveway. He spent much of the morning double-checking the system, explaining how it worked. Jeannie listened, her expression a mixture of gratitude and residual fear. Caleb Thompson arrived around noon, stepping out of his SUV in a swirl of dust. He nodded politely to Jeannie before turning to Ryan. "Got some news," he said quietly, pulling Ryan aside. "One of my contacts over in Maple Bend saw two black SUVs parked behind the old cannery. Same license plates we saw the other night." Ryan's jaw clenched. "So they're sticking around?" "Yep." He overheard them discussing another property near the ridge, belonging to a man named Bernard Stackhouse. They apparently plan to force a sale within the next 48 hours. Ryan frowned. Stackhouse is half-blind and lives alone. That's a prime target for them. He paused. "We need to make sure they don't harm him." Caleb ran a hand over his chin. "Agreed. But we've got limited manpower. We can't guard every vulnerable family." Ryan scratched his temple, thinking, "We need a bigger network. I've got a friend, ex-Delta. Name's Marcus Hawthorne, coming in a few days. But we might need more local support." Caleb gave a lopsided grin. "I might know a few folks with relevant backgrounds." His expression sobered. "But the more people we involve, the greater the risk of intel leaks. The cartel might have eyes and ears." Ryan nodded, acknowledging the risk. "We'll have to choose carefully. Meanwhile, I'll pay Stackhouse a visit. Let him know to be on guard." Caleb agreed, then turned to Jeannie and offered a reassuring smile. "We'll do everything we can." Jeannie mustered a small smile in return. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you both." Ryan shrugged. "We look out for each other here. That's how it should be." Later that afternoon, Ryan drove his Jeep along a winding dirt road toward Bernard Stackhouse's property, an aging cabin situated at the foot of steep, forested hills. Towering pines loomed on either side of the drive, creating a tunnel-like effect as Ryan navigated the bumps and ruts. Upon arrival, he found the old man on the porch, a shotgun across his lap. Bernard's weathered face lit with relief when he recognized Ryan. He waved him over, blinking behind thick spectacles. "Ryan," Bernard called. "Come on up. Just keep your hands where I can see them. My eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be." Ryan lifted his hands, then climbed the porch steps. "Afternoon, Bernard. Heard you might be getting some unwanted visitors." Bernard nodded gravely. "Yeah. They came by yesterday. Talked about a real estate deal. When I told them I'm not selling, one of them said I'd regret that decision. So here I am, waiting on my porch like a damned scarecrow." Ryan looked around. Bernard's yard was cluttered with rusted farm tools, a half-rotten fence, and underbrush creeping close to the house. For defense, it was a nightmare, too many blind spots. "I can help you set up some basic security," Ryan offered. "Tripwires, cameras, that sort of thing." Bernard grimaced. "I'm too old for booby traps. But I'll take cameras. I appreciate it." Ryan nodded, sympathetic. "They might come in force. Are you up for staying somewhere safer? I have a friend who can put you up until this blows over." The old man shook his head. "I'm not leaving my land. Been in my family for 3 generations. I'll die here before I let some punks take it." Ryan respected the sentiment. But an uneasy feeling settled in his gut. Cartel enforcers wouldn't think twice about harming an old man. "All right," he said softly. "We'll do what we can to secure the place. But if they show up, you call me, immediately." Bernard huffed. "Yes, sir. You've got my number." Within an hour, Ryan had set up 2 motion-activated cameras, one facing the driveway and one covering the back approach near the woods. He used a few reflective markers so Bernard could keep his bearings. Then walked him through some emergency steps. By sunset, the old man appeared less anxious, though the tension remained in his eyes. As Ryan pulled away in his jeep, he couldn't shake the feeling that a confrontation was looming closer than any of them wanted. That night, Ryan was startled by a rapid knocking at his door. He opened it to find Savannah Rhodes again, her eyes wide with alarm. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping aside so she could enter. Savannah exhaled, placing a hand on the back of the couch to steady herself. "Sorry to barge in. I just got off the phone with a contact at the veterinary supply store in Maple Bend. She overheard men discussing some kind of big shipment arriving tomorrow night. Something about using farmland routes to hide the cargo." Ryan's pulse quickened. "Did she catch where it's coming from?" Savannah shook her head. "No. Just that they'd be moving it through the old highway near the orchard." She recognized one of the men as a guy who's been pushing land sales in this area. She said he flashed a gun at her when she asked too many questions. Ryan rubbed at the back of his neck. "I bet it's drugs or weapons. If they're funneling contraband through farmland, they want remote roads free of law enforcement presence." Savannah's voice trembled with concern. "We don't need that here. The last thing we want is a smuggling hub." Ryan agreed, heart heavy. "Thanks for telling me. I'll see if Caleb can gather more intel. We might need to intercept that shipment, if we can do it safely." Savannah's eyes flicked to the gear on Ryan's table, maps, a radio scanner, and the dismantled rifle from earlier. Be careful," she whispered. Ryan's gaze softened. "I will. Promise." Meanwhile, at a deserted warehouse on the edge of Maple Bend, Eddie Morales paced the cement floor, barking orders at a handful of men who unpacked crates from the back of a cargo truck. The overhead lights flickered, illuminating boxes filled with sealed packets of white powder. Another crate bore the markings of high-caliber ammunition. A tall figure stepped forward from the shadows. Wearing an expensive suit, Javier Luna, rumored to be one of the cartel's top lieutenants in the Pacific Northwest corridor. "You said the locals would be easy." Javier growled in Spanish, eyeing Eddie with displeasure. "Instead, I hear they're pushing back." Eddie swallowed, frustration evident in the tightness of his jaw. "They are farmers and retirees. A handful have refused to sell. But we'll handle it." "I want Copper Ridge." Javier snarled. "Our new network depends on that farmland. Too many highways are being monitored in southern states. This route will secure our shipments." He stepped closer, voice lowering dangerously. "Make them sell or make them disappear." Eddie nodded stiffly. "We're working on it. Some ex-military type is stirring trouble. Ryan Halverson. He's the one who helped Mrs. Cook. And there's a retired deputy, Caleb Thompson, backing him up." Javier's eyes narrowed. "Kill them both. Publicly. If necessary. The rest of the town will fall in line." Eddie hesitated, aware that the direct murder of local figures could trigger a major backlash. But Javier's glare left no room for dissent. "Yes, sir," he finally said. turning to relay orders to the men. By dawn the next day, Caleb was at Ryan's farmhouse. A travel mug of coffee in one hand and a file folder in the other. He spread out the folder's contents on Ryan's kitchen table, photographs of suspected cartel members, notes from law enforcement bulletins, and a few grainy stills from local security cameras. "That's Eddie Morales," Caleb said, pointing to one of the pictures. "Confirmed associate of a bigger fish named Javier Luna." Ryan recognized Javier from some old briefings years ago. He's rumored to be connected with a powerful Sinaloa faction. If he's here, it means the cartel is serious about establishing a foothold. Caleb nodded. "We also have reason to believe they're bringing in a new round of enforcers. Ex-military types. Mercenaries." Ryan felt a flicker of disquiet. Fighting common thugs was one thing, dealing with professional soldiers who'd sided with the cartel was another. "We'll need backup," he said firmly. Caleb raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of coffee. "Your friend Hawk's inbound soon, right?" "Yeah. But that might not be enough." Ryan tapped a finger on the table. "We need eyes on that shipment coming through. If we can gather evidence, maybe we can get the state police or even the feds to intervene." Caleb frowned. "We do that, we risk tipping our hand to the cartel. They'll know we're onto them." Ryan shrugged. "Let them. Maybe they'll think twice if they realize we can expose them." A grim silence fell as both men contemplated the potential fallout. Ryan broke it by standing up. "I'll set up surveillance near the old Orchard Road. You coordinate with the folks we trust, let them know trouble's coming." Caleb exhaled heavily. "All right. And Ryan, stay safe." Ryan gave a tight nod. "You too." That evening, the Orchard Road was deserted and dark, flanked by rows of apple trees left untended for years. Their twisted branches cast eerie shapes in the moonlight. Ryan lay prone on a small ridge overlooking the road, wearing camouflage suitable for farmland. He had his night vision goggles strapped on, scanning for any sign of movement. Crickets chirped in the background, their song broken occasionally by the rustling of leaves in a faint breeze. Ryan's finger rested lightly on the trigger guard of his rifle, heart steady as he waited. Each minute stretched into an eternity, recalling memories of countless stakeouts in foreign lands. Finally, headlights pierced the night. A convoy of 2 trucks and a black SUV rumbled down the gravel road, stopping near an abandoned fruit stand shack. Doors opened. Figures with flashlights hopped out, scanning the area. Ryan focused, adjusting the zoom on his rifle's scope. He counted 6 men. Through his night vision, he saw them unload crates from the trucks. The men were armed, he could make out the shapes of rifles and sidearms. Another man stepped out of the SUV, commanding the operation. Click. Ryan snapped a few covert photos with a small digital camera mounted next to his scope. This was the evidence they needed. He carefully recorded everything: license plates, faces, the crates' markings. The men began moving crates into the shack. Ryan strained to see if he could identify anything else. The moment he lifted his camera for a better angle, his phone vibrated softly in his pocket, an alert from the motion sensor at Bernard Stackhouse's property. A flicker of alarm ran through him. Bernard could be in danger. Ryan inhaled, forcing himself to remain calm. If he left now, he'd lose valuable intel on the shipment. If he stayed, Bernard might be facing the cartel alone. The memory of the old man's trembling hands on his shotgun made Ryan's decision immediate. He quickly recorded a last few seconds of video, then backed away from his vantage point. moving silently to where he had hidden his jeep. Once inside, he started the engine without headlights, creeping down a service road until he was out of earshot. Then he gunned it, racing toward Stackhouse's cabin. The bumpy drive felt interminable. A sense of dread coiled in Ryan's gut. When he finally arrived at Bernard's property, he saw the telltale glow of headlights in the distance, weaving among the pines. Gripping the wheel, he killed his lights and rolled the jeep forward, using trees for cover. He parked behind a copse of pines, grabbed his rifle, and moved on foot toward the cabin. Muffled voices reached him first. A faint glow seeped from within the cabin's windows, flickering erratically. A single gunshot tore through the silence. Ryan's blood ran cold. He sprinted closer, using the tree line. The front door of the cabin was ajar. Splinters of wood scattered on the porch. Ryan pressed himself against the outer wall, rifle at the ready. He heard movement inside. Carefully, he peered through the broken window. Bernard lay slumped against a chair, one hand pressed to his shoulder. Blood seeped through his flannel shirt. Two cartel men loomed over him, one brandishing a pistol, the other rummaging through drawers. With practiced efficiency, Ryan leveled his rifle at the armed man. Squeezing the trigger, he fired a single suppressed shot, striking the thug in the chest. The man went down instantly, his pistol clattering on the floor. The second intruder jerked around, reaching for his own weapon. Ryan's second shot took him in the leg, dropping him to a kneeling position. He howled in pain. Ryan vaulted through the door, scanning for more threats. Seeing none, he kept his rifle trained on the wounded man, who dropped his gun and clutched his bleeding thigh. Bernard's voice was rasping, pain contorting his features. I am all right, he managed. Shoulders hit. Ryan kicked the intruder's weapon away. The man glared at him, eyes full of hate. You're dead, old man, he spat, writhing on the floor. Ryan ignored the threat. He grabbed Bernard's old landline phone and dialed Caleb's number, requesting immediate help. Then he took up a vantage point near the door, scanning the night for more hostiles. The Orchard Road would have been the perfect time for the cartel to move multiple teams. This might not be the only group. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens approached. Caleb arrived first, his SUV's lights off to maintain a low profile until the last moment. He rushed inside, grimacing at the sight of Bernard's bloody shoulder. I'll call an ambulance, Caleb muttered, pulling out his phone. Hang in there, buddy. The wounded intruder tried to inch away, leaving a trail of blood. Ryan pinned him to the floor with a foot on his back, searching him for a phone. He found one, quickly pocketing it. The man growled in protest, but Ryan ignored him. Damn, Caleb hissed. We're crossing a line here. The cartel will retaliate. Ryan nodded soberly. We had no choice. He looked down at Bernard. We'll get you to the hospital. You'll be okay. Bernard managed a weak grin. I'll live, thanks to you. A few hours later, dawn broke with a somber glow over Copper Ridge. Bernard was in stable condition at the local hospital. The wounded cartel thug was in custody, though it remained unclear how long before a slick cartel lawyer might attempt to bail him out. Ryan hadn't slept. After giving statements to local law enforcement, careful, vague statements that didn't reveal his entire skill set, he headed home. His phone buzzed as he pulled into his driveway. The caller ID showed an out-of-state number he recognized, Hawk. Hey. Ryan greeted. Weariness evident in his tone. You sound like hell. Hawk replied curtly. I just touched down in Boise. Heading your way in a rental car. Should be there in a few hours. Ryan pressed a hand to his temple. Good. We need you. They just shot an old man out here. He'll live. But it's escalating fast. The next move might be full-scale violence. Hawk's tone was grim. I've dealt with cartels before. They don't back down unless you give them no other choice. We'll talk strategy when I arrive. Ryan ended the call. Exhaling long and slow. The sun rose higher, bathing his farm in golden light. But the warmth did nothing to dispel the chill in his chest. The cartel had drawn first blood. And Ryan knew, with a hardened certainty, that he wouldn't rest until Copper Ridge was safe. The sun settled low over the rolling fields of Copper Ridge, Idaho, bathing the countryside in orange-gold light. A gentle breeze rippled across alfalfa rows and stirred dust along a winding gravel road that led to Ryan Halverson's farmhouse. Once a celebrated member of the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force, Ryan had chosen this quiet corner of the world to escape the memories and violence of his past. The farmhouse, nestled against a stand of pines, looked humble and unassuming, just the way Ryan wanted it. He was in his early 50s. With salt and pepper hair peeking out from beneath a battered old baseball cap. Muscled arms and a square jaw revealed a life spent in rigorous training. Though he had long since traded camouflage uniforms for work jeans and boots. It had been years since he retired from the military. And for the most part, life in Copper Ridge had allowed him the peaceful anonymity he sought. He could just be a farmer, tending his land and living free of the burdens that once shaped him. That peace, however, was beginning to fray. The first inkling of trouble arrived one summer evening when Adam Ward drove up to Ryan's farmhouse in a rickety pickup, face lined with worry. Adam explained that unknown men, heavily armed, with Spanish accents, had been scouting farms along Pine Creek Road, pressuring landowners to sell. Rumors flew around town. These investors weren't interested in agriculture. They were part of a powerful cartel expanding northward to set up new drug and weapons routes. The local sheriff lacked the manpower and resources to counter them. Ryan listened intently, a cold knot coiling in his gut. He thanked Adam for the warning and promised he would keep an eye out. And from that moment, the old instincts clicked into place. After Adam left, Ryan quietly went to the barn where he stored relics of his former career, night vision goggles, bulletproof vests, rifles, and tactical equipment. He dusted them off, reminding himself how each piece felt in his hands. He had never intended to revisit that life. But sometimes, trouble arrived uninvited. Not long after, an acquaintance named Savannah Rhodes, a local veterinarian and close friend, appeared on his doorstep late at night. She'd heard that men with suspicious trucks were seen near farms, harassing neighbors about land deals. She pressed Ryan not to do anything too dangerous. But her voice trembled. Copper Ridge was a small, tight-knit place, unprepared for organized criminals. Ryan reassured her as best he could, though a part of him knew this was likely the start of a nasty fight. A few days later, the confrontation Ryan dreaded arrived. He was driving along a remote gravel road when two black SUVs pinned him in, one ahead, one behind. Armed men stepped out, led by a smooth-talking individual who introduced himself as Eduardo Eddie Morales. Eddie claimed to represent a development group, but made it clear that if Ryan did not cooperate and consider selling, there would be consequences. The man's eyes held the cold confidence of someone used to getting his way. And his henchmen appeared eager to enforce that will. Ryan calmly refused. The men let him go. But not before Eddie offered a thinly veiled threat. It felt surreal to stand there in dusty jeans and a flannel shirt, facing down guns. Yet Ryan's Delta Force training simmered beneath the surface. He forced himself to walk away rather than spark violence in that moment. That same week, Jeannie Cook, who ran a modest dairy farm with her husband, called Ryan in a panic. Men with weapons had shown up, threatening her livestock and family unless she signed sale papers. Ryan and his longtime ally, Caleb Thompson, a retired sheriff's deputy who had served in the Marines, rushed over. They arrived just in time to confront two armed cartel goons on Jeannie's porch. The men, faced with the silent intensity of Ryan and Caleb's drawn firearms, backed down. As they retreated, they vowed it wasn't over. News traveled fast among the neighboring farms, men in dark vehicles, forcing families to sell out or else. Some, especially the elderly, had already given in out of fear. Others considered leaving town altogether. But a core group of neighbors, including Ryan, Caleb, and a handful of farmers fed up with being pushed around, decided to stand their ground. Ryan set up discreet security measures, trail cameras, motion sensors, hidden vantage points, trying to protect the most vulnerable properties. His fear was confirmed by intercepting chatter. The cartel intended to use this rural Idaho valley as a pipeline for drugs and arms. They had powerful backers and seemingly endless funds. Even the local authorities couldn't mount much of a response. Ryan recognized a threat bigger than anything Copper Ridge had ever faced. He realized he needed backup from outside. Taking a deep breath, he dialed a number he hadn't used in years, Marcus "Hawk" Hawthorne, a former Delta Force comrade who knew Ryan's capabilities better than anyone. Hawk was tied up in Seattle on private security work. But when Ryan told him about the cartel incursion and the townspeople caught in the crossfire, Hawk promised to head to Idaho as soon as he could. Before Hawk's arrival, violence escalated. Late one night, Ryan was staking out a known backroad after learning that a major contraband shipment would pass through. He recorded incriminating photos and video of armed men unloading crates and stashing them in an abandoned fruit stand by an overgrown orchard. But partway through his surveillance, a sensor alert on his phone warned that Bernard Stackhouse, an elderly neighbor with failing eyesight, was in danger. Forced to choose between gathering more intel and saving Bernard, Ryan bolted for the old man's cabin. He arrived to find the door kicked in and Bernard wounded by a gunshot to the shoulder. Two cartel thugs rifled through the cabin, likely searching for any valuables or simply punishing Bernard for refusing to sell. Ryan swiftly neutralized them, one fatally, the other with a bullet to the leg, then saw Bernard off to the hospital. The county sheriff, overworked and outgunned, took the surviving thug into custody. But everyone suspected the cartel would find ways to continue. Blood had now been spilled on both sides. The next morning, Ryan stood on his porch, watching dust swirl in the driveway as a silver rental SUV pulled up. Out stepped Hawk, tall and lean, with a faint scar along his left cheek, a keepsake from a mission in Afghanistan. His handshake was firm, eyes sharp. "You look tired, buddy," Hawk said in greeting. "Let's fix that." Behind closed doors, Ryan explained everything. Hawk listened without interrupting, occasionally flicking a glance at the farmland outside, as though assessing fields of fire. When Ryan finished, Hawk set down his coffee. "I've dealt with these types before," he said. "They're vicious, well-funded, and unafraid of law enforcement. If we let them settle in, they'll never leave. That same night, the two former Delta operators teamed up with Caleb to piece together a plan. They needed to do more than react. They had to gather enough evidence, and apply the right kind of pressure, to drive the cartel out. They started by tapping local sources, an earnest veterinarian, a few defiant farmers, a part-time radio operator who broadcast from a shed behind his house, and even the local nurse who had prior experience in the National Guard. Gradually, a clandestine network formed, each person contributing specialized skills. Meanwhile, cartel activity intensified. Eddie Morales was merely the tip of the spear. His boss, Javier Luna, a high-ranking lieutenant within a powerful Mexican cartel, had arrived in Idaho. Javier demanded total control of the farmland to ensure safe passage for contraband. If intimidation failed, he instructed Eddie to use force. Copper Ridge braced itself. Strange SUVs and trucks prowled the roads at odd hours. Some farmland owners began to vanish for days at a time, returning with stories of threats or beatings. Others sold their properties under duress and left. The remaining community members, especially those too proud or stubborn to cave, turned to Ryan for guidance. Working at night, Ryan, Hawk, and Caleb quietly fortified key areas. They set up vantage points on ridges that overlooked main roads, installed hidden cameras, and established a system where neighbors could silently radio for help using old CB channels. Hawk took the lead on advanced reconnaissance, creeping through pine stands to observe cartel stash houses. Ryan and Caleb coordinated with a few farmers who agreed to distract or mislead cartel scouts whenever they rolled by. One evening, as the summer heat reached an oppressive peak, the cartel tried a bold move. A convoy of 3 vehicles drove straight to Jeannie Cook's farm, evidently planning to make an example of her family. But Ryan's network was prepared. Motion sensors triggered an alert. Neighbors pretended to be oblivious, and the convoy drove into what they believed was an isolated property, only to find themselves under crossfire from flanking positions. Hawk, perched in a hayloft, took out the lead SUV's engine block with a well-placed shot. Panicking, cartel gunmen jumped out, only to find themselves pinned by well-coordinated rifle fire from multiple farm buildings. The firefight was intense but brief. The cartel retreated, leaving bullet-riddled vehicles behind. The local sheriff arrived after the dust had settled, discovering a few wounded criminals left behind. Faced with no immediate explanation, the sheriff concluded that mysterious allies had come to the Cook family's defense. Ryan and his group made sure no one identified them directly. The townspeople whispered about vigilantes or guardian angels, though many suspected it had something to do with Ryan Halverson. Humiliated, Javier Luna ordered an even larger show of force, bringing in mercenaries with ex-military backgrounds, some rumored to be former special operations from other countries. These newcomers were more disciplined, employing reconnaissance drones, advanced night vision gear, and encrypted radios. They staked out vantage points, trying to locate Ryan's hidden team. Tensions in Copper Ridge turned to dread. Locals began seeing black drones humming over farmland at dusk, occasionally shining infrared beams that few recognized. A meltdown seemed imminent. On a rainy evening at the edge of town, Ryan and Hawk snuck onto a property rumored to be a cartel safe house. The barn looked ordinary, but inside they found crates of automatic weapons, large amounts of narcotics, and suspicious maps of the region's highways. They planted hidden cameras to gather incriminating footage. Just as they prepared to leave, 2 cartel enforcers walked in for a routine check. The resulting hand-to-hand skirmish ended quickly. Ryan and Hawk disarmed them using silent takedowns honed from years of black ops. They left the men unconscious and retreated into the stormy night. Hearts pounding. Days later, a single piece of horrifying news reached them. A local father who'd refused to sell had been found beaten nearly to death in a ditch. Barely alive. This was the cartel's response to their losses, an escalation of brutality. The battered man's wife fled, sobbing, to Ryan's house, begging for help. Ryan's jaw tightened. He sensed a wave of anger and determination surging through the entire community. People began calling him. Some offered supplies. Some offered medical skills. And some even offered to stand watch with rifles. They would not surrender their homes to violent thugs. Soon, farmland across Copper Ridge became a tapestry of hidden preparations. Tractor sheds were converted into bunkers. Hunters contributed their knowledge of the terrain, turning wooded trails into ambush points. Amateur radio operators jammed the cartel's signals at key moments, sowing confusion. Caleb organized a rotating watch system, ensuring that each vulnerable homestead had backup. Savannah, though a veterinarian, brushed up on her emergency medical skills in case bullet wounds or serious injuries started piling up. Javier Luna responded with another brazen plan. A convoy of heavily armed gunmen and mercenaries would roll into Copper Ridge at dawn and systematically take over. They would arrest the main troublemakers, Ryan, Caleb, and Hawk, then terrorize everyone else into selling. To lure Ryan into the open. They threatened to harm random families every hour unless he surrendered. The sun rose on what felt like a battlefield. Fog clung to the valley. And the only sound was the rumble of engines echoing over farmland. Ryan's vantage point was an old silo, from which he watched lines of black trucks approach. One by one, they turned onto the main road near the orchard, then branched out across farmland. The tension was electric. When the first squad of cartel mercenaries advanced on a house near the orchard, they found it seemingly deserted. No animals in the yard. Encouraged by the easy approach, they stepped onto the porch, right before triggers attached to the fence line activated flashbang grenades. The burst of deafening sound and blinding light disoriented them. And the empty house erupted with gunfire from concealed slits in the walls. The squad scrambled behind vehicles, returning fire in disarray. Simultaneously, a second cartel group tried to block the main road to town, anticipating a counter-response. But a hidden observer in a hillside orchard radioed the coordinates to Hawk, who used a high-powered rifle to disable the lead truck. Gunshots echoed in the crisp morning air. Caught in a crossfire, the cartel's men found themselves pinned from two directions. They had come expecting untrained farmers and found ex-military precision at every turn. In the confusion, Ryan and Caleb led a small strike team through the orchard, flanking a group of mercenaries who were pinned behind an overturned pickup. Without a word, they unleashed carefully aimed shots that took down the lead gunman. One of the mercenaries tried to throw a smoke grenade, but Hawk put a bullet through his forearm, forcing him to drop it at his own feet. Smoke billowed, and Ryan's team seized the advantage, capturing 3 combatants while the rest fled or were incapacitated. But the battle was not over. Javier Luna himself had stationed a larger force at a newly seized farm on higher ground, controlling a central route. They had heavy weapons, including a mounted machine gun on a pickup bed. Javier believed he could mow down any resistance from the vantage point. He threatened to torch the barn where a local family had been locked inside, using them as hostages. Word spread via radio: if Ryan didn't come forward, Javier would start executing people. Ryan realized the only way to break this standoff was to face Javier on that farm. The local militia, neighbors defending neighbors, secured the perimeter while Ryan, Hawk, and Caleb crawled through a shallow irrigation ditch that snaked close to the property. They carried silenced weapons and a few carefully rigged distractions, more flashbangs, plus a couple of homemade smoke grenades. With a timed signal, they lobbed flashbangs onto the farm's elevated porch. Deafening blasts erupted, stunning the mercenaries guarding the door. Hawk took out the machine gunner with a single shot, while Ryan dashed for the barn. He found Javier brandishing an assault rifle, screaming threats in Spanish. The floor was slick with spilled gasoline. A single spark could end the lives of the terrified family locked in a side stall. Ryan didn't hesitate. He sprinted low, weaving between crates. Javier fired wildly, bullets splintering wooden beams. One seared past Ryan's arm, leaving a hot graze. But adrenaline kept him moving. Dropping behind a half-wall, Ryan popped up to fire a precise burst at Javier's rifle, knocking it from his hands. Javier staggered and reached for a handgun. But Ryan surged forward, tackling him. The two men slammed into the barn wall, the collision shaking loose dust and old cobwebs. They grappled, each trying to gain the advantage. Javier was strong, fueled by rage. But Ryan's decades of special operations training took over. A swift elbow strike to Javier's temple disoriented him. Ryan pivoted, hooking Javier's leg and throwing him to the ground. Within seconds, Ryan had Javier in a painful arm lock, disarming him completely. Javier spat curses, sweat pouring down his face. "You have no idea what you've started," he snarled. "The cartel will never stop coming." Ryan's voice was ice cold. "You picked the wrong town." At that moment, Hawk and Caleb burst in, having neutralized the remaining mercenaries. Ryan quickly found the keys to the stall. He and Caleb freed the family, who stumbled out, trembling but unhurt. Outside, gunfire had tapered off. The last pockets of cartel fighters were overwhelmed by the coordinated efforts of local shooters. Some surrendered when they realized they were surrounded and out of ammunition, others tried to flee in vehicles, only to be blocked at back roads by farmers who'd parked large tractors as barricades. By dawn's light, what remained of the cartel presence was either captured or desperately retreating. In the aftermath, the sheriff, backed by a hastily assembled multi-county task force, swept in to make arrests and secure evidence. Javier Luna was handcuffed and hauled away, screaming threats until the end. Eddie Morales had vanished during the chaos, presumably escaping with a handful of survivors. But with Javier captured and their network exposed, the cartel's operations in Copper Ridge were shattered. Word spread across Idaho, and soon the federal authorities arrived to investigate. They found crates of drugs, weapons, and reams of forged property documents. They also found a suspiciously well-organized system of farmland defenses, yet no one in Copper Ridge offered a clear explanation of how simple farmers could repel such a formidable threat. The locals kept quiet about Ryan's old Delta Force background. The official record chalked it up to a combination of neighborly cooperation and vigilante intervention. Once the roads were clear and the last black SUV had vanished into the horizon, the battered community began to rebuild. Ryan, arm bandaged from the bullet graze, spent the next week helping neighbors reconstruct fences and barns damaged in the firefight. Savannah fussed over him, insisting he let her redress his wound properly. Jeannie Cook brought homemade meals for the volunteers. Bernard Stackhouse, sporting a healing shoulder, chuckled grimly at how city folks would never believe the war that had been fought on this quiet farmland. Hawk lingered in Copper Ridge for a little while, soaking up the small-town camaraderie. He helped Ryan tear down the improvised bunkers and stash gear back in safe hiding places. Over coffee one morning, Hawk teased Ryan about stepping back into the fray after vowing to live a peaceful life. Ryan only shrugged. "You can take the soldier out of the war," he said. "But sometimes the war finds him anyway." Eventually, Hawk returned to Seattle. But not before hugging Ryan like a brother and telling him to keep in touch more often. Caleb resumed his quiet law enforcement consulting, while the farmers who had taken up arms went back to tending their crops. The entire valley felt changed, no longer naive about the world's darkness, but perhaps stronger for having faced it head-on. The cartel had chosen Copper Ridge for its remoteness, expecting easy prey, and instead ran into a prepared, tightly knit community led by one of the most capable warriors the U.S. military had ever produced. Summer turned to autumn. Leaves in the surrounding hills flamed with color, and the farmland settled into a calmer routine, though fences still showed bullet holes in places, and some barns bore scars from skirmishes. A sense of hope pervaded the community. New families moved in, grateful for the renewed sense of safety. Rumors still circulated about how precisely the town had defeated a cartel invasion. Some believed they'd had covert government help, others whispered about unstoppable vigilantes. Ryan Halverson, for his part, resumed his life as a quiet rancher. On a cool October morning, he stood on his porch, gazing across the pasture at sunrise. A soft glow illuminated the hills and fields that he had risked everything to protect. By his side stood Savannah, a coffee mug warming her hands. She gently rested a hand on his arm, sharing the moment of peace. "You did good," she said, voice full of gratitude. Ryan nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. He wasn't a man of many words, but he felt it, too, that sense of belonging, of purpose. In another life, he had flown around the world, waging secret battles for national security. Now, he had found a place worth defending at home, even if it meant becoming the warrior he used to be. As the sun lifted higher, the shadows receded, revealing a valley that had survived the storm. Soon, the day's work would begin, feeding horses, fixing fences, harvesting what was left of the season's crops. Life would go on. The threat had passed. Yet Ryan Halverson knew, in some corner of his mind, that true peace came not from denying conflict, but from standing ready to confront evil whenever it appeared. And so, each morning, he rose with the dawn, quietly vigilant, just in case another shadow ever dared to fall over Copper Ridge again.